Welcome to Reflections. I'm John Van Auken, the Director of Legacy Education here at the Edgar Cayce Center. And in this program, we're going to interview three very interesting presenters at our annual Ancient Mysteries Conference, October 6th through 9th. We're going to have Dr. Mark Anthony, we're going to have Dr. Manu Seyfzadeh, and we're going to have Professor Adam Stokes. Dr. Mark Anthony is a psychic explorer, and he's a fourth-generation psychic medium that communicates with the spirits. But at the same time, he's an Oxford-educated lawyer who practices law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and even before the Supreme Court. But he's going to bring to us some fascinating psychic information about the Star of Bethlehem and the astrology in the heavens that led the Magi to come to the birthplace of Jesus. Hello again, Mark. It's good to see you. You've been at the Edgar Cayce Center before, and you and I have done the Earth Keepers program several times, so it's very good to see you. And I see your African background there, and we both have an Egyptian connection that is deep. You were mentioning to me about the curse of King Tut's tomb, and now we're celebrating an anniversary of the discovery of that tomb. Bring us up to speed on that.
Thank you, John, for having me on, and for all the Edgar Cayce, everyone that's a member. It is such an honor to be able to speak to you. The curse of King Tut's tomb and the entire discovery of Tutankhamun is such a fascinating story.
Yeah. And
the chief archaeologist, his name was Howard Carter.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorite characters in history. He was impatient, rude, abrupt, obsessive, a complete genius. And when he focused his sights on something, he never gave up. He couldn't stand the media. He hated answering questions. And but the thing is, that's exactly the type of personality it took to find this. Because John, as I know that you're very well aware, having been to the Valley of the Kings many times, Tutankhamun was a big mystery. Archaeologists had seen his name mentioned in Egyptian records, but his tomb had not been found. And Howard Carter made an acquaintance with Lord Carnarvon.
Yeah.
And Carnarvon, the fifth Earl of Carnarvon, and he hailed from Highclere Castle in England. And what's cool about Highclere Castle, John, that's where Downton Abbey is filmed. So everybody knows Highclere Castle, but we know Downton Abbey. And the scenes of Downton Abbey are all the scenes with the aristocrats are filmed upstairs. The scenes with the help, with the servants, are filmed in a movie studio outside of London. And the reason for that, the rumor has it that the basement of Highclere Castle houses the private Egyptian collection of the Carnarvon family.
Oh.
Yeah. And the current Earl of Carnarvon, the 8th Earl of Carnarvon, is the great-grandson of the Earl of Carnarvon who funded the Tutankhamun expedition.
Yeah.
So Lord Carnarvon's picking up 20 years worth of archaeological excavation bills. And this was a huge dig. There was 100 people on staff, and Carnarvon had it. World War I had just ended. Britain was on the verge of bankruptcy. The aristocracy really took a hit. And he told Howard Carter, I'm done. And Carter begged him, please, just one more season. So he reluctantly agrees. Well, what's really fascinating is that Carter, he was grumpy and abrupt, and he had this house a few miles from the Valley of the Kings. He bought a canary at this bazaar, and he kept this little yellow canary, and the Egyptian staff in his house, they were relieved because the canary kind of calmed him down. It would sing to him, and they called it the Expedition of the Golden Bird. And one of his servants an Egyptian said, Inshallah, God willing,
Yeah.
we will find a tomb of gold, and this bird will lead us to that. So it's November 4th, 1922. Howard Carter wakes up, another restless night. He knows he's running out of time. He's only got a few more months before his credit line gets terminated. So he heads out to the Valley of the Kings, and he gets there. Nothing's happening. Of course, he shows up very proper British. What is happening here? And then he realized someone either got killed or they found something. And the foreman runs up to him and said, Mr. Carter, and they had uncovered a single step in the sand.
Wow.
So, yeah, and then feverishly, they start digging, 16 steps going down into the earth.
Wow.
And then they find a door, and they're removing the sand from a door. And Carter figured, all right, we're going to find another empty tomb, and this will be nice. But then his heart almost stops, John, because the seal, the clay seal on the door is intact. And he recognized the cartouche, the Egyptian hieroglyph, the name Tutankhamun.
Wow.
So he knows they found an intact tomb. Well, at practically the same time that they found the door, meanwhile, back at Carter's house, the Egyptian staff heard this ruckus, and they ran into the living room, and they were horrified because a cobra had gotten into the canary's cage and was devouring the canary. And the Egyptian staff was totally horrified. Cobras were the symbol of the Egyptian pharaohs. And this was a very bad omen that the mascot of the tomb had just been devoured by a cobra.
Oh, yeah.
So Carter immediately gets armed guards to protect the entrance to the tomb. He gets a message out to Lord Carnarvon. Carnarvon says, we'll be there as soon as we can. Well, it took 3 weeks. John, you're an explorer, you're an adventurer. Can you imagine the stress of waiting 3 weeks? Well, Lord Carnarvon shows up with his daughter, Lady Evelyn. And after researching Lady Evelyn, I can't help but to think that Julian Fellows, who wrote Downton Abbey, didn't get the idea for Lady Mary and based her on Lady Evelyn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because he was very prim and proper, but this is a girl who could kick some butt and take some names. I mean, and so back at the tomb, they remove the seal, they open the door, and then there's more debris. It takes an entire day to clear a 30-foot hallway, and then they arrive at yet another door. Seal also intact. And Carter's own words on this, and I'm paraphrasing him here, he carved a hole in the upper left-hand corner of the door into Tutankhamun's tomb. And he's there with Lady Evelyn and with Lord Carnarvon. And they said when they carved the hole, warm air emitted from the tomb, and it smelled faintly of coconut oil and perfume.
Ooh.
And Carter wrote how air that had not been breathed for over 33 centuries we were feeling.
Oh.
So Carter's holding a candle. I mean, this is 1922. It's not like they, the Rayovac and there's again.
Right.
And he's holding it and he's looking, and Lord Carnarvon goes, "Can you see anything?" And they said Carter's jaw dropped, and all he could get out of his mouth was "wonderful things."
Wow.
And then Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn looked in, and they said everywhere was the glint of gold.
Yeah.
And it took them 10 years to get the over 5,000 artifacts out of the tomb. Well, Carter put together the best team. He got the chief archaeologist from the Louvre, from the British Museum. The photographer came from the Met in New York City. He wanted the best of the best there. Well, the media flocked on this site like no tomorrow. This was the biggest story in the world, intact Pharaoh's tomb. And Carter absolutely loathed the reporters and the press. And Lord Carnarvon intervened and said, "I'll handle the press," because he
Yeah.
loved center of attention. Well, the problem is he sold the rights, the exclusive rights to the story, to the London Times. And this cut every other major media outlet in the world out of the story. And the reporters were not happy about this, and they were looking for anything they could. Well, rumors had been circulating in Carter's team about the canary being devoured by the cobra. So there was already a sense of superstition that disturbing this tomb was a bad idea. And an unscrupulous reporter, this is, we kind of tend to think of tabloid stories as a modern phenomenon. Not at all.
No.
Yeah, and this one reporter said, he wrote an article that said there was a clay tablet that they found in the tomb, which was inscribed in hieroglyphs, which said, "Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the rest of the pharaoh." All right, so now they have the cobra devouring the mascot. Now they have a curse, which was completely made up. But then people that had entered the tomb started dying. And the biggie was Lord Carnarvon. It was April of 1923. He was at a hotel in Cairo, and he'd been bitten by a mosquito on his cheek, and he was shaving, and he cut the mosquito bite, and an infection started, and he dropped dead a couple days later of an infection. And according to the press and people that were with him, at the moment he expired, all of the lights in Cairo flickered and went out for a couple seconds. So now the reporters are like, okay, there is a curse. It struck down Lord Carnarvon. And within the next couple years, over 24 people who had entered the tomb all died under mysterious circumstances, including an American millionaire, a tycoon. 2 members of the British aristocracy died, and one of the aristocrats' fathers, he was so horrified, he wrote a suicide note that said, "I can't take the deaths anymore," and he jumped to his death from a building in London. And then during his funeral procession, the funeral carriage ran over and killed an 8-year-old boy. All right, so by now, the media, people are dying, rumors of the curse are flying. It is just permeating the world media that there is this curse. And ideas came up, even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a medium, and he's the originator of Sherlock Holmes. He said that the Egyptian priests of ancient times conjured elementals, evil spirits, to protect the tomb. Other theories said that the Egyptians coated things in the tomb with long-lasting microbes. And one even said there was uranium spread throughout there. Well, all of these theories have been debunked. And John, what I love about working with you is, like me, you like the adventure, you like the history, you like the mystery, but we're science guys, okay? And this was Egypt in the 1920s. And even when you go to Africa now, you need to get shots. Dengue fever, malaria, yellow fever, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, there are so many diseases. And antibiotics were not readily available until the late 1930s, right before World War II. So it was not uncommon for people to die under this. And the one person that you think the evil spirits really would have gone for would have been Howard Carter. Well, they didn't. and he was interviewed, and he said of the curse, it was Tommy rot. He said that the role of the archaeologist is one of science, not superstition. But I wonder, because Carter, despite becoming the most famous archaeologist in the world, and of course, he was invited to speak at many universities and venues throughout the world, he was shunned by the archaeological community because he didn't have a college degree. He'd simply been working on digs since he'd been a teenager. He worked his way up through the ranks, learned to read hieroglyphs. So he was snubbed by British academia, and he was plagued with depression. I wonder he certainly had an obsessive compulsive personality. It's possible he may have been bipolar, but they meaning people around him said he would lapse into these long depressions. Also, he was never married. He was a confirmed bachelor. And there's all sorts of speculation about his love life, but nobody records him ever being with a woman or a man or anybody. A lot of his critics said simply nobody could stand being with him for periods of time. So maybe the curse in some way did affect him by plaguing him with loneliness and absolute sadness. Because even though he discovered the most incredible find, it never did bring him any source of happiness.
That's for sure. So what are you going to do at the Ancient Mysteries Conference this year?
I'm presenting sacred astrology.
Ooh.
And the subtitle is The Mystical Magi and the Mystery of the Star of Bethlehem.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just going to give everybody a teaser because I want you to come and see it. But we tend to think of the Star of Bethlehem as something on a Christmas card. And we tend to think of it that it was some kind of spotlight from heaven right on a manger. All right. But if it had been, don't you think mean, nasty, sociopathic, narcissist Herod the Great would have noticed that?
Yes.
Yeah. And in my research, I have found two different astrophysicists, one from Rutgers University and one from Notre Dame's University. And they have done research and created computer models and discovered a highly unique and unusual astrological phenomenon which occurred within the constellation Aries. In the ancient world, Aries was the symbol for Judea, Syria, and the unusual astrological phenomenon foretold the birth of a great king of divine origin.
Wow.
And I'm going to leave us with one little tidbit, but I'm sure you'll ask more, and that's okay, is that this particular astrological phenomenon only ever happened once and will have only ever have happened once. It will never happen again. And so I put together a presentation utilizing PowerPoint and star charts, but I promise the audience, this is not going to be a dry technical treatise.
Good.
I like stories, I like the history, the mystery, the politics of the era. You know, we all hear the story about Herod ordering the slaughter of the infants.
Yes.
Slaughter of the innocents. And when you look at who Herod the Great was, this was one wily, very sophisticated, and very dangerous politician. And he outmaneuvered the most powerful people in the world. He was a low-level bureaucrat in Judea, and he was married, then dumped his wife and married into the Maccabee family, the royal family of Judea, becomes king, and then starts to have all of his wife's family members executed. So he consolidates his own power. Meanwhile, not only is he dealing with this, he outmaneuvers Pompey the Great, the great Roman conqueror, outmaneuvers Julius Caesar, outmaneuvers Antony, Cleopatra, and Octavian to hold on to his throne. The guy definitely wasn't stupid, but he was definitely ruthless, because there was a lot of people executed because of Herod the Great. And so when some wise men from the east, from the court of the Persian Empire, which back then they called the Parthian Empire, show up talking about some king that could possibly be a descendant of the house of David, meaning big time rival for Herod, well, I'll just leave you all with that.
Wow. I'll look forward to that. That's great. You know, in your book, you actually are a great explorer of the unseen, from the cosmic to the subatomic, and yet you always seem to tie in science with this metaphysics, with this vast vision of life beyond physicality. And you even, in your book, you talked about the electromagnetic field of our being. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. We know that everything is made from molecules, which are in turn composed of atoms, which in turn are made up of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And we all had to learn that in
Yeah.
science. And since the dawn of the 21st century, physicists have found that electrons, protons, and neutrons are made from a smaller particle, which is referred to as a quantum, and it's pure electromagnetic energy. So ergo, the term quantum physics.
Right.
So essentially, everything on the subatomic level and is made of the same particle of electromagnetic energy. And what's fascinating about this, John, is historically, science has been divided into physics, the study of energy and inorganic matter on one side, and biology, the study of organic matter, living matter. But now on the subatomic level, there's no difference.
Yeah.
Everything is made of the same electromagnetic energy. So
Yeah.
that means that you and I are made of this electromagnetic energy, but then again, so are the desks that we're sitting at, and so are the radio waves that this show is being broadcast on.
Right.
So is the surface of Mars. So when you start thinking of this, this gets into how everything is energetically interconnected. Every great spiritual teacher, from the sages of ancient India through Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Gandhi, Native American spiritualists, they've all expressed how the who and what we are, our soul and spirit, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies.
Yeah.
We know from the field of neuroscience that the brain has an electrical field. And we know from the law of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. So when I was writing my book, which is, The Afterlife Frequency,
Yeah.
I explain here, I introduce my new term, the electromagnetic soul, to describe what we really are, which is pure consciousness, a soul, a spirit, which is eternal electromagnetic energy. And I've been very honored that a number of scientists who've endorsed the book, some of the top afterlife and near-death experience researchers in the world, and Kevin Tedeschi is also one of the endorsers of the Afterlife Frequency. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
A number of scientists have adopted the term electromagnetic soul. They're calling it the EMS. And the thing is, I like to explain the concepts, but then I illustrate it with stories because, look, I suffered through so many boring books in law school and in the practice of law. I'm not going to subject anyone to that. So I'll get into the physics, but I'm going to put some stories in there to help people understand this. And Edgar Cayce talked about a phenomenon very much like this.
Yeah.
That we're not these bodies. We're only temporarily residing in them. The who and what we are pre-exists, comes in, moves on after the body stops working.
Yes, exactly. Well, all the years I've known you, you have never been boring. So I am sure it's going to be an exciting book to read and an exciting conference lecture for us to enjoy. And we are really looking forward to you to coming back again. You've been here before and it was fantastic, and we're so happy you're coming back.
Well, thank you. And John, may I repay the compliment? I've heard you speak many times, and I've been on the edge of my seat every time. We've got a really great, not only you're speaking and I'm speaking, but we have other speakers here that are just amazing.
Yes.
And this is going to be a really great event for everybody that can attend in person. And if you can't, then you can view it, I believe, online after the event. And this is always one of my favorite conferences is the Edgar Cayce Ancient Mysteries Conference.
Great, thank you. We look forward to it, October 6th through the 9th, 2022. We're coming out of our COVID cocoons, and we're going to enjoy a wonderful adventure through higher thought and how we can assimilate that into living a higher life. Dr. Manu Seyfzadeh is going to present to us some ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs that actually indicate the ancient Egyptians knew there were records hidden under the Sphinx, something Edgar Cayce predicted to us and said we can find those records. Dr. Seyfzadeh is actually working with the Egyptian archaeologist and the archaeological division to look into these records and help do some research that may bring forth the Hall of Records that Edgar Cayce talked about. Hello, Manu. It's so good to see you, and I'm so excited about you coming to our Ancient Mysteries Conference this October. And your topic is going to draw a lot of attention because Edgar Cayce talked about records under the Sphinx, and you're going to show us hieroglyphic evidence for a real Hall of Records under the Sphinx. Could you speak to that for us a bit?
Yes, so when my angle coming at this was originally to find evidence for an older Sphinx, and as you may know, I've published a couple of papers with Robert Schoch and Robert Bouval. We were basically hunting after hieroglyphic evidence that would prove that there was a statue before the Great Sphinx. And we published that information. And during that research, I literally stumbled on a word for archive, and that word is called afdet. It's a very important word because it relates to the creation story of ancient Egypt as told in the coffin text. And it turns out that this word for archive it refers to a portable archive, and the evidence for the existence of such an archive goes all the way to the First Dynasty, which is the first time that this is mentioned in a record. And not only that, this is not just a myth. You know, people nowadays always question, well, you know, you read this in a mythical story. Does that mean it's a real entity? And the answer to that is yes, because there is a funerary stela from the Fourth Dynasty, one of the sons of Sneferu, the first big pyramid builder after Djoser. And on that son's funerary stela, the same word is mentioned. So he was one of the royal archivists, and he was his father's administrator of this archive. Okay, so it's a portable archive. So this was my entry. And of course, you know, this has many tentacles, and it ended up taking me to Middle Egypt, to a rock cemetery, the coffin texts, newer texts, and there's a wealth of information. I couldn't believe it. I thought this would be, you know, just a few little details here and there, but on the contrary. So there's the challenge isn't so much bringing this stuff forward. The challenge is to distill it down into something that I can present to your audience in an hour. And so this is what I'm working on right now, to make it as poignant and give you just the evidence so that your audience can judge for itself. And of course, the ultimate goal is to go back to Egypt and petition the Egyptian government for another experiment in front of the Sphinx. Yeah,
exactly. Have you had any contact with the new archaeological division of the Egyptian government?
To some degree, yes. So we just published a paper, Robert Nayland and I did, about Pyramid of Unas, the pyramid texts, which is also relevant to this topic. And that paper was translated into Arabic by an archaeologist that works in Beni Suef. So he's a member of the ministry, and he has basically shared this paper with the universities, with his colleagues. And so I think, yes, so we're trying to involve the Egyptian archaeologists themselves. So
that's a good idea.
Yeah, we don't want to just make this a foreign
No,
attempt
no,
because,
yeah.
yeah, I think they should be part of it. And so I think we've made a little bit of movement over there. Yes.
I think that is often a mistake that has been made in the past where we don't include the native Egyptian archaeologists who are well educated in Egyptology and all the research that's been done, and they live right there.
That's right.
So that's a wonderful decision that you made.
Yeah. I have a couple of acquaintances. For example, the director of the Doom area, his name is Ala Nasser, and his colleague from Beni Suef. I took them into the Pyramid of Unas a few months ago, and I showed them the astronomy of the pyramid text. And you know, this has never happened before, because it turns out that most of the experts in pyramid texts are out of the country. And especially when it comes to the astronomy, you know, this was described by a German philologist, Rolf Krauss, for example. But you know, these people don't go to Egypt and then take the native experts and take them to the site and show this to them. So, and they were amazed. I showed them, you know, how the moon, for example, waxes and wanes in the pyramid text, how that's encoded, or showed them some constellations that are encoded, and they couldn't believe it, that all that information can be seen in the hieroglyphic text and with the topography of the text, the way that the texts are laid out. Yeah, so
this is
absolutely
wonderful. This is the best way to do archaeology there. I feel 5-10 years ago, a lot of Egyptians were disappointed that they weren't included when they actually have researched and studied like we have. And for you to show them firsthand what you're finding, that's wonderful. It's inclusive. You're bringing them into the whole expedition.
And they have great ideas, John. They come back with, you know, they come back with feedback and new ideas. So this is a kind of collaboration that I think is necessary.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to your talk at Ancient Mysteries, October 6th through 9th this year.
Yes.
It's just on the list of talks here, yours was the one that jumped out at me right away. I want to see that hieroglyphic evidence.
Yeah. And you're giving a great warm-up with your lecture, because that's exactly what I'm going to be talking. I'm going to be talking about an Ark-like archive. You're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, yes. And that's the amazing thing. That's another serendipitous discovery, that basically the archive, the textual evidence for this archive refers to something that sounds just like the Ark of the Covenant. Okay?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a portable archive, right? And so, of course, that is what Moses built for the Ten Commandments. And after Exodus, and the Israelites took this, basically used this as a container for their laws, and so there you go. You have a chest.
You have it right there. Yeah.
With the words of God. Okay. And the Afdet that I am tracing is exactly that. It's an archive that contains the Book of Thoth, the writing, and this is explicitly described in the coffin text, that the sun god creates the world with the words that are recorded in this particular archive. So it couldn't be more poignant. It couldn't be more related to what you're going to be talking about. So when I saw your title, I said, John, thank you very much.
You know, I got to tell you, though, it was this strange man called Edgar Cayce who turned me on to these sort of ideas. And he was doing it by going into a connection with an infinite universal consciousness. And one time while he was in one of his trances, he was asked about something there, and he said, well, I'm standing here right now mentally to tell me what you're looking for, and I'll tell you if it's here. And I thought, whoa, this is fourth dimensional stuff.
That's right. He was ready to report what he was seeing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's the elements that he's describing. All of these elements you can find. For example, there is a magical papyrus called P. Harris 501. It's at the British Museum, and there's a segment there on the first page of the papyrus. It's called the Hymn to Shu. Within that hymn, there's a paragraph that could have been Edgar Cayce reciting it in one of his dream states, okay? And because it has to do with the Hall of Records.
Oh,
and
that's great.
so when I come in October, I will show you this text verbatim.
Oh.
I will show you the original translator, which is a Frenchman by the name of François Chabas. And the amazing thing is that François Chabas was painted in front of the Sphinx by, it's a sort of a cartoonish painting by a Frenchman that was his contemporary. And on that painting, you will see François Chabas in front of the Great Sphinx, and the Great Sphinx, under her right forepaw, is holding a document, a written document. So, I mean, and this is and this papyrus, mind you, comes from the New Kingdom. So this is from 1200 BC, approximately the time of Ramses III. There you go.
Yeah.
So it has all the elements, the Hall of Records right there, and it's the right forepaw in this particular case.
Yeah.
So which is what Edgar Cayce was talking about. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think there's so much information. I think you guys are going to have a field day with all of this.
Oh, yes.
And if you write this up, or if we write this up in a nice proposal, experimental proposal, we show it to the Egyptian government, I'm sure they will eventually let us do another experiment, at least a non-invasive experiment, like the one that Robert Schoch and Thomas Debicki did.
Yeah, at least the non-invasive. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
This is wonderful and exciting. And I am so looking forward to you presenting at our Ancient Mysteries Conference. Thank
Same
you
here.
so much for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Good wishes to you and success with the Egyptian archaeology.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Professor Adam Stokes is a graduate of Duke University and Yale, and he is going to bring to us a fascinating insight between the Native American mounds found in North America, the Book of Mormon, and Edgar Cayce's teachings about the journeys of ancient people from faraway lands to North America. Even the idea that tribes of the Hebrews were here years before we think they were, and that ancient records can be found and have been found in North and Central and South America related to this ancient period. He's got the whole morning. It's going to be a fascinating presentation. Hello, Professor Stokes. It's so good to have you here and to discuss your topic at our upcoming Ancient Mysteries Conference. I think it's fascinating that you're going to correlate Native American mounds, the Book of Mormon, and Edgar Cayce. Can you explain some of that?
That's quite a bit of stuff. Yes, well, I've been an admirer of Edgar Cayce's work for 20-some years, ever since I was a sophomore in college. I have a whole story I could tell about that. But one of the things that I really, perhaps my favorite thing about Edgar Cayce is his interest in ancient history and in ancient civilizations.
Yes.
And Edgar Cayce talked about the history of ancient America numerous times in many of the writings and works that have been attributed to him. One of my favorite books that I read time and time again, actually there's two of them, Edgar Cayce's Origin of Mankind, Origin of Man, and Edgar Cayce's Atlantis. And in both of those, he talks about ancient America. And basically he notes that there is evidence based on his readings, and this has been confirmed with archaeology, that ancient Israelites were here in North America thousands of years ago. And so it kind of correlates a lot with my own research and my own interest in ancient American history, because I believe that many of the mounds that currently exist, built by, as mainstream scholars would say, the mound builders, can be attributed to these ancient Israelites who came over from the old world and intermixed with Native Americans and absorbed their culture.
Yeah, I'm sure you're aware of those in Louisiana that actually, actually do date way back there.
Yes, a lot of people when Cayce first came out in some of the readings and said, ancient Israelites have been here 3,000, 4,000 years ago, there was some pushback on that. But archaeology, and my friend Greg Little talks about this, who's done a lot with the A.R.E., archaeology confirms that these mound building people were here 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And I think that there's a direct connection, as Cayce says, between these mound builders and the ancient Israelites.
Okay, and now how do you work in the Book of Mormon?
Yes, good question. So I'm not a member of the Salt Lake Church. I am part of a Latter-day Saint tradition. It's a much smaller denomination, the Elijah Message Church. But we also, as all of the Latter-day Saint denominations do, believe in the Book of Mormon. And the basic gist of the Book of Mormon, people read it, they find it a boring book. For me, it's scripture. For me, it's sacred. But the basic gist, if you need to know about the Book of Mormon in 5 minutes, it's that ancient Israelites during the time of Zedekiah, now this is much later, 586 BCE, came over from the old world when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed over to the new world. They crossed by ship, by boat into North America. Now there's some debate between Mormon scholars as to whether they entered South America, stayed in South America, or North America. I kind of take a minority position that they came to North America, but there are many Mormons who take the South American position.
Well, you may know that we have been doing archaeological research for many years, going way back into the 1960s and 70s.
Yes.
And we bump into Mormons also doing archaeological research.
In South America, I know Dr. Little's told me some stories about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
You guys really believe in ancient records are available if we go looking for them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. And
I
so,
was actually recently, I was actually just reading a book by a friend of mine, Jonathan Neville, talking about what happened. So basically, we believe the Book of Mormon is translated from these golden plates. And there's a question about what happened to the golden plates.
Right.
And Neville points out in his book that there was a repository on a hill, the Hill Cumorah in New York City, where there were a bunch of ancient records written. And I'm of the firm belief, and I think the findings that archaeologists have found, both in North and South America, kind of confirm this, that there are a bunch of ancient records that we haven't got to, and that thankfully weren't destroyed when the European conquest began.
well, there is, Edgar Cayce was asked about the ancient crystal of Atlantis, and he said, well, one of them is in the basement of a museum in the U.S., and they don't even know it's there.
I can
Sitting
believe
in
that.
a crate.
There's a lot of stuff that's crated, that's boxed up, that I don't think mainstream museums even know they have.
Yeah.
I totally believe that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I'm very excited that you're going to pull these three sources together. I can see how the legends and the mounds have some evidence, especially in Louisiana. Those southern mounds down there have some evidence of Hebrew involvement, pre-Hebrew actually. You're aware of some of that little stone that was found with the etchings, year 1 of the Jews?
Yes, very familiar with that. So
A lot of people
that was-
question it, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, well, that's actually written, there's a lot of criticism about that stone, but that's actually written in Paleo-Hebrew. And one of the things I often like to mention is that if we're looking at a forgery, it's something that was created in the 19th century, our knowledge of Hebrew now is not nearly as good, it is much better, excuse me, let me rephrase that, is much better than what people knew in the 19th century.
Right.
And if they were going to forge it, they would have written it in what is now known as Aramaic script. That's what your usual Torah scroll or Hebrew Bible is written in, not in Paleo-Hebrew. So the fact that stone, year 1 of the Jews, is written in Paleo-Hebrew is, in my opinion, evidence for its old date, and that it is indeed authentic.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's very hard to ignore that. Very hard.
And you have the Grave Creek stone, which has, holy to the Lord, also in Paleo-Hebrew, Kadosh Adonai. So that's not just the only artifact that you find. These things are found all over North America. You have the Los Lunas stone in New Mexico, which is written in Paleo-Hebrew. So these are found all over.
Now, tell me, is this like one of the lost tribes of Israel going to the west, or is this an intentional mission?
That's a great question. And answer your question, I think it's both, actually. So Cayce talks about migrations of Israelites way before there was any type of persecution of them. They just came over here for whatever reason, for whatever purpose. They came over here and settled. But then you have later migrations of Israelites and then Jews who come over during times of persecution. 586 BCE, when the first temple is destroyed, 70 CE, when the second temple is destroyed. So I think that it's both. I think that Israelites knew of this realm, the Isles of the Sea, as they call it in Isaiah, in the Hebrew Bible. They knew about it. They came over thousands of years ago, and that later generations retained that memory of the Israelites coming over, and they knew the path, they knew the direction that they should go, and so they continued to come here for centuries. Even the Book of Mormon speaks of multiple migrations of people.
Well, Thor Heyerdahl certainly showed us that you could sail from Africa to the New World just following the currents.
Yes,
and those are the same currents that hurricanes follow, coming from Africa to the New World.
Yes. I had the wonderful pleasure about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was in Iowa. I usually go every year. I love the Heartland. But my friends, I have some dear friends there who have a museum called the Phoenicia Museum. And the Phoenicia is a ship that's a replica of an ancient Phoenician ship that's housed in Marseille, France, in the museum there. And a few years back, the captain of the ship, he made a replica of the ship, and he sailed it using those currents that you just talked about. And he landed off the coast of Florida. So that showed that that intercontinental travel like that was certainly possible by boat thousands of years ago.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. When A.R.E. did its tours of Mexico and the museums there were Phoenician images, statues, there were African statues, Polynesian statues. It was amazing. The ancient people were traveling.
Yes. Well, the Polynesians have it in their race memory and their oral tradition that they traveled to the Americas. And they said, they can tell you how their ancestors did it in very small boats, in very small ships. Yeah. So there's no doubt about that. The Phoenician thing is incredible because that's something that even quote unquote, I always say quote unquote mainstream archaeologists, even they have to acknowledge. So books like Jennings' Ancient Native America, in the back, in the appendix. They don't put it in the main book, but in the appendix, they have all of these Phoenician coins, like you said, statues that people have found here in North and South America. So where'd those come from? Well, I think that's proof that the Phoenicians were making transatlantic crossings. Yeah.
Oh, when I was interviewing some kahunas in Hawaii, I asked them how on a little boat could you sail the big ocean? And they said that they learned to identify clouds that were over land versus clouds over water. And so they could, I couldn't believe it. So I tried to do this myself, and I was not successful.
Well, they've had centuries and centuries of practice.
Yeah, that's right. Well, wow, it's a big topic. I see you've got 2 parts of the morning, thank goodness, because that's going to be a lot of information you're going to convey.
Yes.
Good. I'm happy that you're bringing this to our attention. The thing that always interests me was where Edgar said our souls were those ancient people. Have you felt that same sort of connection with your soul, having some intimate connection to the ancient world?
Yes, I definitely have. So I think that I'm an elder in my church, and I think that by being a part of a Latter-day Saint tradition, I feel I'm connected, to the Nephites. That's what we call the Jews in the Book of Mormon, and to those ancient Jews who made that journey. Kind of seeing our church tradition as kind of the continuation of what they started. So in the Book of Mormon, they come over the Atlantic and they start a Church of Christ in North America. Now, this is interesting because, as you know, both in North and South America, there are images of crosses and even a Church of Christ in South America that existed before the European, the Catholic Christians came over. And when the Magi talked to the Mayans, they said, we already know this stuff. We already know, you're not telling us anything new. So I kind of see in my church as being kind of the continuation of that. And I definitely see kind of a kindred spirit, kindred soul with those ancient people.
Oh, this is fascinating. I have to tell you, Adam, I'm excited.
So am I.
I think our audience is going to really enjoy your information.
I hope so.
I'm sure they will. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.